Hi everyone. What I'm going to share today is how I use the story star to work through what's called the emotional cycle of change. When I first learnt about the emotional cycle of change, I was like, that is why the middle of a project feels so difficult. I'll run you through the 5 pieces of this loop that most people go through if they are trying to change any aspect of their life, whether it's writing a book, starting a business, embarking on a weight loss journey, moving, renovating a house. It is really the key to understanding why it gets so hard in the middle. Something that I found missing though in every explanation that I heard of the emotional cycle of change was how to get through it and how exactly we can approach that point, which is called the valley of death, the 3rd stage in the cycle, and bust through our blocks and get to the fully embodied transformation, that point where you are never going back to who you were before. If you've never heard of the emotional cycle of change, it is a 5-stage framework, I guess you would call it, for how people move through change. The first stage is uninformed optimism. You're excited, you want to make a change, you're either moving away from pain or moving towards pleasure. These are the only things that motivate us to actually make a change, and you've signed up, you're all on board the program, or you've seen what someone else has done and you're like, yeah, I can do that too. You're all inspired. That's the first stage. The second stage is informed pessimism, and that is when you've actually started to do the work and you're realizing just how much there is to learn, just how much there is to do. I remember when I first started my business, I signed up for a course on creating a course. And in the marketing, I was told you don't need to understand tech to do this. And as soon as I started building my course, which was my informed pessimism piece, I was like, what the hell were they talking about? I need to know so many different softwares and understand tech to do this and build this course. So that's the second stage. Most people make it to the 3rd stage, which is the valley of despair. And that is where you are at this crisis point where you can't really see the way forward, and you know that you're never going back to that uninformed optimism part with this project, but you're not seeing any changes and you're not getting any rewards. You're not getting any concrete or material rewards. And what most people do and what happens everywhere, and this is why short-term weight loss programs, 1 month change your life things, and most renovation projects blow out by a massive proportion of money. People don't complete things that they've started, whether it's writing a book or committing to that full process needed to change, because they hit that messy middle point, the valley of despair in the emotional cycle of change, and they have this crisis of meaning. They can't remember why they signed up for this. They're not getting any rewards. They're not seeing any tangible benefits, and they're very vulnerable at that point. So as soon as they see something tantalizing, a shiny object or a new version of how things could be, they turn around and go back to the start where they're uninformed, optimistic. They think this is a better way, the grass is greener, and they start all over again. And we go around this loop again and again and again, and we never bust through. And these patterns and these programs and these habitual parts of our identity and behavior never actually change because we don't make it through that valley of despair, which I actually see as the real starting and turning point to change. So what comes after those 3 stages in the emotional cycle of change is informed optimism, and then success and fulfillment, which is where you have actually made the change and it's lasting. But what I found missing from this framework or this model was any sign of what to do and how to approach that middle part. Because as a creative writer, as an author, I've run my own business for over 20 years. I was a freelance journalist before I was an author, and I now run my own education company. I've always been doing these big new projects, and I see it with people that I know who run their own businesses, and every author that I know hits this messy middle part of the project, and it always has the same feeling, which is this swampland of There is nothing to look forward to. Things aren't happening. Your mind starts playing tricks on you and you think that nothing's happening, and you're so vulnerable at that point and you want to give up. But really the transformation point is what takes you from human to hero, and that is where you start to embody full and lasting change in whatever area this is, whether it's a business and the outer or the end point that you are seeing in these marketing or shiny object things that you're going for, new projects that you're starting. You're not seeing everything that they went through in that middle point to actually make the change. So what I want to share is how I see the 6 story star codes as being key to fundamental personal change and self-development, not just writing a compelling, conscious and transformational true story. These are keys to psychological development. So the first story star code is the hook, the problem, the blind spot for you, the whole reason that you have started a new journey for change. And I call it the holy hook because this is a problem that only you can experience in the way that you experience it. The whole reason that you start on a cycle of change is because you're moving towards what you see as a promise. And that's the second story star code, a promise of change, a possibility, a hope. You have hope. You know somewhere within you that there is an opposite to this problem and you want to go for it. It's key that you identify that, because if you don't know what the promise is that's pulling you forward, you won't go forward. You won't do what needs to be done to keep moving through this cycle and pushing through to the other side. The third story star codes, and this is really important, is understanding what type of problem or project or challenge this is and getting specific, okay? So I teach this in terms of writing a memoir, where you need to get specific on the type of book this is that you are writing, because that informs the structure, that informs the narrative framework that you're going to follow. But in terms of personal growth, you need to get really specific about where and how in the 4 areas of life that actually matter to your survival, this project or this is going to change you. And that is the 4 areas I've spoken about in other videos. And this is really where theme comes in stories, is love and relationships, health and the body or the physical body, financial and material survival, so that's business and economic survival as well, and status and career and position in the world. Those are the 4 areas that matter to our life on a 3D level. So these are just the concrete things that we have to go through as humans, and these are the areas that will improve or cause suffering in our lives. So you need to identify where and how this is important in that area or in any of these areas. I teach a whole process around this in The Art of Memoir, and it comes down to your values. The 4th story star code is about friction. Now this is so deep, and this is where you're really starting to realize, and this friction point, the crisis of meaning, which you reach when you're in that valley of despair, is when you need to dig deep and see what this is really, really about for you. So getting past that superficial goal that you have for this project, whether it's weight loss or to make $1 million in a week or whatever you signed up for. You probably signed up for a program or joined a transformational personal development thing in one of those 4 key areas of life because you saw this promise of swift change in one area, and that was the tantalizing thing that you wanted. But in this friction point, you're really finding out what the real core desire is there that you've maybe never even admitted to yourself. And if you don't identify that core unconscious desire, you will not move past the messy middle, the valley of despair, because that is what matters beyond any superficial outcome. Now, where I believe we can get the most help in this framework and this process of transformation, and how I see what I teach inside The Art of Memoir is really showing you how to change any area of your life, not just writing a book, is these last 2 story star codes. One of these is archetypal character identity, so who you are identifying as and where you are identifying these important other universal archetypes. Who are you counting as your ally? Who are you counting as your mentor? What parts of you are the villain or the enemy that you need to start becoming aware of so that you can move forward and let them go? And this is very deep, and this is really where the big work comes from. That is identifying where these archetypes and characters play out in your internal process, because every story that we tell about an experience involves aspects of our personality and our persona that we are seeing reflected in the outer world. The last part of the story star codes and the way that I teach storytelling that is different to just gets you to pump out a story is this framework. I teach a combination of the hero's journey with story structure and other aspects of character change on a deep and fundamental level, is becoming conscious of where you are along these stages of character growth. And that is where, once you start to become conscious of these stages and how they show up for you, and symbols and patterns that reflect these stages, and exactly what is required to move from one of these stages to the next. Let's say you're in the valley of despair. You get to zoom out on your life. And this is where this story star code process, the hero's journey, the narrative structure has helped me in so many areas of my life, not just writing a book and getting published, is identifying where you are in that framework and who, and particularly these archetypal principles and patterns and how they play out, and identifying what you require to just consistent action to move forward past this messy crisis point. And surrendering, and the key to the whole turning point in the hero's journey is the 8th stage, which is the supreme ordeal, where we surrender our ego. And even though in the hero's journey, that's right in the middle, that's the midpoint of the narrative, and that actually ties into that friction story star code that I talked about before. You will not identify your surrender point if you can't identify the unconscious friction that was really running the show here. And that is how you start to shift your identity and what you are doing, and you move forward and you let go of previous preconceptions, programs, beliefs, ideas of how this was going to look, and you move forward past that middle point and you keep going and you have the drive. And this is where the change actually happens. The change doesn't happen at the end. This is what people always think about true transformation, that it's at the end of the project when you submit your draft, or when you get that award, or when the scales change for you. That's not the change. The change is actually happening in that midpoint, that crisis of confidence, that crisis of meaning in the stages of emotional change model that is called the Valley of Despair. And you, by refusing to go back to the beginning and starting the loop again, which everyone repeats all the time, is how you actually move from human to hero, and you make that fundamental shift in your character and your identity. So this is where I see the story star codes as helping you to change on a fundamental core level. When you start to understand patterns and see story in this way, you will never look at a problem the same way. You will never look at your business or your life or your health or anything like that the same way. I heard a quote once when I was listening to a podcast when I was building my business, and that was, do not judge your back end, because you know the back end of your business and your life like no one else, but all we're seeing with other people is the front end. And that means, in another way, is like saying you see people at the end of the project when they've gone through all the pain and the suffering and the grueling pieces that are so boring that they don't want to put it in their sales pitch or their advertising or their short summary of the story. But that is what's actually driven the change there, is what they have had the perseverance and the wherewithal to change in themselves in that piece of the process through certain questions, through certain patterns of thinking, and through certain behaviors that has actually driven the change there. And that's not what we're really seeing on these 30-second sales pitches and things like that. I could tell you, I wrote a draft and I revised it in 6 months, but you're not seeing there what I had to prepare, what I had to shift on a core level inside me to get that story to publication and submission standard in the course of 6 months. And this is what I teach you inside the Art of Memoir, not just how to structure a story, how to revise the technicalities, but more importantly, how to think about the project, how to think about yourself and change and transformation from this objective level where you can really start to apply that to not just a book draft, but any goal that you set yourself. And that is how you embody full and complete transformation in any area of your life. You understand how to identify the patterns that keep repeating and what you need to do. It's going to look different for everyone to change those patterns, particularly when you hit that valley of despair point. I've just dropped a new training inside the Art of Memoir, exploring how these archetypes and the hero's journey and other aspects of story can help you to move through the emotional cycle of change and reach fulfillment. Because this is a personal development process just as much as it is a writing process. Because writing your story and changing your story is actually the key to changing your life. All that change happens on the inside before it even shows on the outside. I will link to where you can find out more about the Art of Memoir. I hope this has been helpful, and I'll see you for another video soon.